And so what we're trying to tackle is how do changes in the economy occur and correct themselves. So kind of the key thing for chapter 10 is invisible hand shocks and corrections. How do we get back to some sort of equilibrium after something's happened? So the shock could be a war. The shock could be a natural disaster. The shock could be something. So something happens to the economy, and then if we just kind of leave the economy alone, what are the things that bring us back to equilibrium after the shock has occurred? So that's kind of the theme here of the chapter. And so what we need to get into next then is our aggregate supply shifters. And I think for this one I'm going to start you off without complicating things with the aggregate demand, for starters anyway. So we got real GDP measured on the horizontal axis, and the price level, the average level of prices measured on the vertical axis. And the long run is what I like to start off with. So where does long run economic growth come from? A question that's been tackled by economists and other people for a long time. And so economic growth is graphically here this level of the potential for the economy moving this way. What causes the economy, the long run aggregate supply curve, to shift to the right? And so it is closely tied to our concept of the production possibilities curve from the early chapters. And so we're focusing in on the actual real things in the economy, not the prices of things, but resources and technology. Okay, so number one, so this is long run aggregate supply shifters. Long run aggregate supply shifters is economic growth. So number one, an increase in the quantity of resources. So what were the basic 4 resources that we started off class with? 4 basic resources of the economy. Shout them out if you think of one of them. Land, labor, capital. Come on back, row, I'm counting on you. Land, labor, capital. What's the last wild card one? Anybody?
Something like non-rate resources? I think that might have.
It's kind of the wild card one. Land, labor, capital.
Ideas?
It's close to ideas. Who comes up with ideas? Yeah, Alex? Entrepreneurship, yes. Land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. So all of those things, let's go ahead and just list those. So the basic resources, the 4 resources: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Which is a hard one to spell. Entrepreneurship. I still didn't spell it right. This has got an E wrapped around the U. That's the hard part, I think. But luckily this isn't spelling class. All right, land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. So, land covers a lot of things. Sunshine, rain, soil conditions, elevation, like if we want to do some coffee growing or something. So land is all natural resources. So we might be able to do, have an improvement in land, a discovery of oil or a discovery of some minerals or something like that. So all of that would lead to a shift. So an increase in natural resources, I'll just leave this one kind of general, would lead to a shift to the right of the long run aggregate supply curve. An increase in the labor force. Ooh, since we got the midterm coming up next week, what's the labor force? Who's in the labor force? What do I got, Tim? People above 16, yes. I want to tighten that up though. That's so the working age population, so we got the total population of the United States. The working age population is the greater than or equal to 16 years of age and older. Madison?
Looking for work.
Looking for work, but what are they? Can't find a job. What do we call those people? Unemployed. And then who else is in the labor force? The unemployed, the number of people unemployed plus the number of people employed. Yeah, right? So it's the number of people working plus the number of people not working but looking, right? So that was our labor force. So we talked about, people coming back into work. Maybe we have a large inflow of high school graduates or something, people that are entering. There's kind of a baby boom was the story of World War II in the United States, that people came home from the war, right? The big World War, the big one you guys have read about, and guess what they did with their spouses?
Produce labor force.
Made labor force, yes. So we had what's called the baby boom, right? The baby boom. The baby boom was this large influx of people that came in after World War II. So about 16 years later, those kids are entering the labor force. Well, what happened to that? An increase in the labor force caused an increase in the long-run aggregate supply. We have more resources running around our island now with the extra babies that are now 16. All right, so an increase in capital. So an increase in, let's just say, the number of computers. I should have said something like AI, but we'll just do the number of computers. Leads to an increase. So we kind of have this technological revolution here with the internet and being able to use computers right here on our phone, little portable computers, right? So that causes economic growth. And then finally, maybe there's some reduction in regulations that causes more entrepreneurs to do it. So an increase in entrepreneurship through less barriers to starting a business. That would lead to an increase in the long-run aggregate supply. Okay, so the bottom line here, it's our resource base that's driving long-term economic growth. What does our resource base look like? That keeps this thing drifting hopefully to the right and not to the left. So all of that stuff is economic growth. So kind of the key point is an increase in the long-run aggregate supply is long-run economic growth. Which is one of our biggies. So number two is somewhat related to that, but it's got enough of a difference. Is an increase in technology. So that one's just too kind of nebulous out there. Let's really think, like, what is technology? What is technology? We like to point at our phones and say, the technological advances in this thing is just incredible over the years, right? So what really is technology? Because an increase in the number of computers, number of phones, the physical number of these things has that technology kind of built into it. So what exactly is technology? What is technology? Jesse, you want to take a stab?
Anything invented made by hand?
No, it's not anything invented. That's a good one to bring up. So it's not all inventions, but it's related to it. I want to narrow down. Here's all inventions, and here's the ones that kind of are related to technology. You want to take a stab? Okay, Madison?
Isn't it kind of just like tools made to make our lives easier?
Yeah, so you're getting into the productivity. So it's inventions that make us more productive, right? So in the world of inventions, there's some things that are just cool or something, but it doesn't help with the production process in terms of making us more productive. So technology ultimately is something that's embodied in capital, right? For the most part, it's something that's embodied in capital. Actually, the way things are going in life, augmented humanity, the technology might be embodied in our heads at some point, right? And to some degree is when we start thinking about implants or prosthetics or some other things where people might have a disability or something. So some of that technology actually can be embedded in here, but it's a part of the capital structure. And so really at the end of the day, technology is nothing more than information that helps us be more productive. So technology you can think of as information that increases productivity. Good time for us to refresh our memories on what does productivity mean. Productivity equals formula. What does it mean to be more productive? The average level of productivity. We did this with Japan and the US on our first week of class. We looked at productivity levels. What does it mean to be more productive?
Produce more of something in the other country?
Yes, okay, so in the Japan country thing, one country could produce more of something, and then I want to add on to that a little bit, Nick. Using less resources or the same amount of resources, however you want to frame it. So it is, the important part of our productivity is it's one thing, the output relative to how much input was used. So productivity is the number of units of output divided by the number of units of input. Now to put it into macro perspective here, output is real GDP, right? That's a measure of our output of the nation, our income. And so from a macro variable perspective, this concept of productivity would be the GDP number divided by maybe the labor force, right? The amount of labor that was used. So we could look at GDP divided by the labor force might be something that would give us an idea of how productive is our workforce, the number of units, and it would be measured in dollars because GDP is measured in dollars. But if we just take that, the average person is making this. This also ends up being an income per worker calculation, right? Because income is our production of goods and services. So we can kind of think of that as a real GDP per person. So that's another variable we've been using. So, but here, when we're thinking of productivity, we're thinking of the production process. Okay, any questions or comments there? So let's make sure we tie this here. An increase in technology leads to an increase in the long run aggregate supply curve. So it's possible that the quantity of resources has remained fixed, but yet we had this new whiz-bang idea on how to use things more efficiently, and we became more productive through the increase in technology. Okay, questions on that one at all? Okay, the last one is an improvement to our institutions. So institutional improvement that increases the productivity of resources. So if the United States gives aid of some sort, maybe it's for roads or vaccines, you could probably pick your thing, to a poor developing country in Africa, and the leader of that country more or less takes that money and redistributes to its cronies, to its golfing buddies and stuff, and that money doesn't flow to people, then we're not going to see a bump in economic growth from that aid money, right? So the institutions, the government structure that's in place, can play an important role on whether things are getting done. And it doesn't, I just use aid as an example, but it could be other things. So the law of the government, if the government is corrupt and it's hard to start a business because you have to bribe your way into, so really only people that are fairly well off can be business owners, and the poor people don't really have a chance at doing that. So can we have improvements in the institutions within the country? The money supply is another great one. Is the government able to just run the printing press? So one of the institutions is the central bank of the country. And so if the money supply is abused in the sense that the government can just hit the old, hey, let's go spend some money, right? That ends up being an institutional problem, right? And so then it causes instability in the currency, and it's pretty hard to run a business or decide whether you're going to expand your business. I saw this firsthand in Zimbabwe when we were driving around Harare, the capital, and I kind of looked around, and there was one Wendy's, I think it was, Wendy's or Pizza Hut, but otherwise there was no national chains. And every other developing country that I visited, I always would see, Taco Bell and McDonald's and whatever, right? These global fast food chains. And the reason is that the instability of the country drove out those corporations from wanting to do business in Zimbabwe, right? So it's the institutions that were in place there that kept business from growing, starting jobs, having that type of thing come in can be an element of new resources to the economy. That's not going on because of the institutions in place. All right, any questions or comments there? All right, let's write a couple of those down, because I know institutions in general, the word institution is kind of a man-made constraint on behavior. So institutions, these are really, let's start with that, a man-made constraint on behavior. Ottawa University is an institution. Why? Because we change your behavior. How? To get a degree here, what do you got to do?
Don't get in trouble.
Don't get in trouble. Take some classes. Do you got to get it? Can you fail every class and get a degree here? No. So we're changing your behavior. You're probably taking some classes. Maybe this is one of them. Hopefully you'll start to embrace it. But you're probably taking some classes that you wouldn't have studied on your own, right? So we're changing your behavior in order for you to do this exchange, the market exchange of an Ottawa University degree for your time and your tuition dollars, of course, right? So that is still, Ottawa University is an institution, so that's the general thing. Here at this country level, for macroeconomics, most of the institutional issues would be kind of government related. So government institutions. So number one, the central bank and money supply, which we're going to have a whole week that we're going to talk about money and central bank. Government institutions. Is there a constitution and democracy, or is it more of a dictatorship? I'll just put kind of a question mark. What level of corruption is there within the government? I'll just put question mark, corruption. Those sorts of things will impact the efficiency of resource use and ultimately keep countries with bad institutions not growing as fast and not having as good outcomes relative to countries with better institutions. And our last week together, we'll kind of learn that empirically. We'll kind of measure that and show that. Okay, anything last on that? Okay, so short run aggregate supply shifters. So now we got this little guy here in the short run. Number one's the most important one, and that is a decrease in resource prices. So a decrease in resource prices leads to an increase in the short run aggregate supply curve. So recall that lag time between resource and output price adjustment. Lag time between output and input price changes. Prices on the shelves at Walmart are going to change first, and then eventually there could be an impact on resource prices. This is kind of the general narrative, not always true in every situation. Okay, number two is a fall in the expected rate of inflation, a decrease in the expected rate of inflation. Will lead to an increase in the short run aggregate supply curve. And the key point that we've talked about before with this is people start changing their behavior now based on what they expect to happen in the future. So people change behavior / choices now in response to expectations about the future. Number 3. Favorable supply shocks. Favorable supply shocks. So this could be something like good weather. Good weather for crops. Maybe it's lower prices for imported goods like oil. Lower prices for imported goods like oil. So a favorable oil price shock. Oil turns out to be pretty important in the American economy. We use it for a lot of stuff. Gasoline, you start thinking about all the trucking that goes on and the fuel for cargo ships, unfortunately with our Baltimore accident, right? And trains, trucks. If oil prices change, that could have an impact, at least in the short run, for those things moving in the right direction for some short run growth. All right, so now the key point here I want to make is on the shift. So I kind of held off putting this here because this is not necessarily an equilibrium, but rather a starting place. And so the short run aggregate supply curve will also shift with all of these other things that the long run aggregate supply curve shifts with. So I guess I got to add number 4 onto here, is the other shifter too. So on some things they move together. So if there was holding prices constant, if there was a shift in the quantity of the labor force, we get a shift to the right. Long run aggregate supply moves to number 2. And the short run aggregate supply holding prices constant also moves. Short run aggregate supply, number 2. Let's add on number 4 on our shifter list here. Number 4, all of the long run aggregate supply shifters. So we have those 3 things that we listed here are also going to do that. And so the key point here is when this happens, both shift to the right, holding the price level constant. Under number 4 only, when both of them shift. One through 3 are all unique to just the short run aggregate supply curve shift. So note 1 through 3 for the short run aggregate supply will only shift the short run aggregate supply. here we can put parentheses LRAS2 and SRAS2. So that's the red ones, the way I drew if that shifts. Well, let's draw a new one just to be clear, hopefully, with long run aggregate supply and short run aggregate supply. Starting off at the full employment level of output and the price level of 100. And then let's put resource prices currently at a wage rate of $10 an hour. So the average labor cost is $10 an hour. So if resource prices changes, this shifter number 1, if wages go up from $10 an hour to $15 an hour, only the short run aggregate supply curve will shift. And so when that happens, we don't get any more output. We don't get more beer, chicken wings, and pizza. We only get higher prices of beer, pizza, wings, and chicken. So let's say this goes up to 104. All right, so the key point with this is we don't get long-run economic growth. The key point is shifters 1 through 3 do not cause long-run economic growth. Only price level changes. All right, well, let's put it all together. Any questions on ramping that up? Okay, Jesse, how about a number between 7 and 15?
13.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Nadia, give me one of the aggregate demand shifters from yesterday. You were here yesterday, right? So we're going to do an example. We'll call it the Nadia effect. Give me one of those shifters.
An increase in the real income of the rest of the world.
Okay, an increase in the income of the rest of the world. So, Nadia effect. Suppose there is an increase in the real income of foreigners. The rest of the world, row. What is the effect in the short run and long run for the USA? This sounds like a great midterm question for your test next week. So I would put like a really big star, like memorize this, like know this. I might not call it the Nadia effect on there, but. So what is the short run effect and the long run effect? Assume the economy starts in a long run equilibrium. All right, so it could very well be a question similar to what you might be facing a week from today. And so the best way to start this one is with a macroeconomic home base. Macroeconomic home base, the question told us we're starting in an equilibrium, long run, so you should have that memorized. That's where all three lines cross. Aggregate demand, short run aggregate supply, and long run aggregate supply. Long run aggregate supply always anchors us where the potential for the economy is, the full employment level. It's really where we think the economy's going in the long run. And then, of course, there's some existing level of prices. And it's just kind of convenient to say that it's a price level of 100. All right, so this will get you partial credit on the test next week, just having that memorized. So you should definitely have home base memorized. So make a little note to yourself in your notes and memorize macro home base.
You mean the graph or?
That'll at least get you a partial credit. Yes, the graph. You might want to remember that Y is real GDP, the quantity of things. Okay, so now, with the Nadia effect, what happens here? An increase in foreign income. So the real income, the rest of the world's getting richer. What's going to happen?
Probably
Let's go somebody other than Nadia, since she's got the Nadia effect down pat. She found it in her notes. So from yesterday, you should have it in your notes. What did you get, Tim?
It's a small guess, but not going to rise, like shift to the right.
Demand's going to rise. Yeah, and you don't have to guess. It should be in your notes, but Tim guessed right. He said this is kind of a guess. So your gut feeling's good, but you kind of have to have those shifters. That's why we spent a lot of time on all of the shifters. Those are the shocks to the economy. So notice that this is something that's coming that's outside of the USA's control, right? It's outside of government policy. It's outside of everything. It's just that, hey, foreigners, for whatever reason, they're having some strong economic growth and their real incomes are growing. And so that's going to cause the aggregate demand curve to shift to the right. From AD1 to AD2. All right, so what is your prediction then in the short run? So what is the effect of the short run and the long run for the United States? What's the effect in the short run? We go to the back of the room here. You guys, what is that graph saying? You should know how to interpret this stuff now. It's not much different than chapter 3 with the demand for beer and pizza and chicken wings. What's changed now with the new situation with AD2? Price level, good, went up, right. And what else? So price level went up. The new current state of the economy is currently at PL2. So prices have risen from 100 to, let's say, 103, just to make up a number to motivate things. What else happened, Fernando?
Long run.
So what happened with output? So this is connected with what?
Real GDP.
Real GDP went up. Now it's the actual level, not the long run level. This is where we're making, in your notes, we have a distinction about the current state of the economy versus the long run potential for the economy. That was tied back to our squiggly lines, right? There's the actual state of the economy at any given point in time. The long run is somewhere in there, the kind of the average, if you will, that we always kind of gravitate back to. So this is really our potential. Long run aggregate supply is that, and this is the current state of the economy. The current state of the economy, our short run equilibrium, is where the actual aggregate demand curve intersects the actual short run aggregate supply curve. And so output has gone up in the economy due to this foreign income increase. How did that happen? Well, along the short run aggregate supply curve, what's being held constant? Yeah, along the short, in the short run, what is being held constant? We just went over it. Look at that little graph the last graph we just did. What is being held constant along the short run aggregate supply curve? How do we move along it? What's held constant?
Price level?
Yeah, what prices? It's part of the prices. The price level's changing here, but you're onto it. The price, something's changing, but something else is not changing. What's not changing, allowing us to move from, let's say, a point like A to a point like B? Along the, what is it? Wages, very good. So wages, or more generally, resource prices in general, are being held fixed. That's the lag time thing. So remember, the whole idea here is that the economy gets shocked with something. Prices are going to adjust. In general, prices are going to move together. Output prices and resource prices in the long run, because in the long run, prices don't matter. Prices are going to figure themselves out. But in the short run, output prices would be expected to move quicker than resource prices. So it's possible for us to go beyond our full employment level of output. And kind of think of it this way. If you're used to working a 40-hour work week, can you work a 55-hour work week? Yeah, you can. Do you want to do that for the next 3 or 4 years? No, but for a short period of time, we can kind of push ourselves beyond what would be kind of the long run comfortable spot to be, right? Where things kind of make sense. So it's possible to push ourselves out. So we're pushing ourselves out, we're able to go up, but that's not going to be sustainable because these folks go to the grocery store, and how much are prices more at Walmart? How much has the price on the shelves gone up by? 3%. They're working harder and they haven't gotten a pay raise. Is that sustainable? No, they start saying, hey, I can't afford groceries anymore. I need some more money. And so there's upward pressure eventually for resource prices to correct themselves. So while we can have this push in the short run, we are going to have some corrections in prices, some adjustments to get out of that situation, because this is the sustainable level of production in the long run. This is not sustainable in the long run. Things are kind of out of whack in a sense. Okay, Jesse?
Is this like getting paid overtime when you work extra hours and that's how they compensate?
It can, but it's more general than that, but yes.
So the wages would be classified as a supply.
The wages are reflecting the prices of resources. So I try to use wages to kind of tell the story better, but actually it's the price of machines, the price of cargo ships, the price of shipping containers, you know, the whole supply chain.
But not the price of labor force.
No, including the labor too. So all of the resources are included here: land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. So I like to put wages because I think I hope it helps tell the story a little bit better. Like, oh yeah, I need a pay raise, right? It's kind of out of whack or whatever. All right, so this then is the short run equilibrium. So in answering this question correctly next week on your midterm exam, you should write something like this: the short run effect. The increase in real income of rho leads to an increase in aggregate demand, which leads to an increase in the price level, output prices, and an increase in the actual level of real GDP. So those two things went up. So in the short run, in summary, we move from point A to point B on my graph. So you can add point A and B, where resource prices are fixed along the short run aggregate supply curve. All right, so then where are we going in the long run? Okay, so now in the long run, the economy is going to get back to where the long run aggregate supply and the aggregate demand intersect. So kind of the key point here to figure out the short run effect. So for the long run effect, look where long run aggregate supply and aggregate demand intersect. This is where the economy is heading with the invisible hand. So we reached a point where this isn't sustainable in the long run, and so resource prices are too low and need to come up. Well, when they get added on to the mix, the overall economy is going to come to point C, back to the long run. So the economy is going to come to rest. Again, I'm just making up a number here, let's say at 105. At point C. And now we can kind of cheat. How much of a pay raise do the people need to restore their purchasing power? If ultimately prices on the shelves at Walmart have gone up by 5%, how much of a pay raise do resources need to restore purchasing power? 5%. 5% of $10 is, let's see, 10% is how much? That's the way my brain works. 10% of $10 is $1, so 5% is 50 cents. So the short run aggregate supply curve, people are going to start asking for pay raises, and the economy's been kind of overheating, and so they find that they can't even hire workers anymore at $10, by the way, so that's another aspect of this. Wow, production's really high, we need to hire some people. Well, nobody's willing to work at $10. So let's make it $12, let's make it $11, right? And so resource prices start to adjust upward. Where do they find balance again? Where do we find equilibrium? With a 5% resource price adjustment, which means $10.50 is the new wage level. And now at point C, we're back to a long-run equilibrium. All right, so let's see here. So here we go. So long-run effect, I guess I already kind of started this here, so I won't repeat it again. Long-run effect, we're going to move from B to C because there'll be an increase in resource prices. An increase in resource prices of 5% to restore purchasing power. So that means there's a decrease in the short run aggregate supply and a new long run equilibrium with all three lines crossing. End of story. All right, any questions or comments there? All right, so now let's bring in this unanticipated and anticipated business and look at the difference. Let's get rid of this. So let's do, what does an anticipated change in the economy do? So anticipated versus unanticipated. So if we're anticipating, what have we already done? If we've anticipated a change, what have we already done? Started preparing for it, right? And so this is kind of boring here, but I thought it's a good place to start. An anticipated change has really no real effects on the economy. So what does an anticipated change in the economy do? nothing. We change our behavior now to reflect the change. And so what's kind of boring about this answer is that the aggregate demand, long-run aggregate supply, and short-run aggregate supply, all of that is stagnant. It already includes that aspect. So let's draw it one more time here. Good practice. So the point is that where that is located, these aggregate demand and aggregate supply, they already reflect anticipated changes. So anticipated change is built in already. So you could kind of think of it, I should have maybe I thought about bringing my other golf club, but I didn't think I was going to get to this. It's kind of like if there was a change coming, but we anticipated it, then both these things moved, output prices adjusted and resource prices adjusted at the same time. And so if that happens, where we're at today already reflects that, right? And we don't have any movement, any fluctuation in real GDP. So the ups and downs of the economy come to us from unanticipated changes. So our conclusion is the ups and downs of the business cycle come from unanticipated changes. So let's do another example. So suppose there's an oil shock. This is part of what drove, part of the story that drove what happened in the United States back in the 70s. So the OPEC oil cartel, so the Organization for Petroleum Exporting Countries, kind of controls the world supply of oil, and they were restricting supply. There was some turmoil in the Middle East and some other factors that cause oil prices to increase. So let's do an oil price shock. So an increase in the price of oil, a very important resource in the United States. So let's start off with our long-run equilibrium. Curvature there. Let's make that try to be a little more straight there. All right, so there's our home base. And let's just say this is at the, world price of oil equal to $20 a barrel. And then all of a sudden, boom, there's this unanticipated change of oil prices skyrocketing. And so oil prices go up to $60 a barrel. All right, so now we can go back to our tool. We got our toolbox here. Where is the current state of the economy always shown? What's the current short-run equilibrium? The intersection of what two things? Aggregate demand and short-run aggregate supply, right? So that is the short-run equilibrium. So we can always kind of go to that and say, oh, this is the current state of the economy. Are we in a recession or an expansion? Recession, right? So economy's down. And so we have a recessionary gap. Prices are up. So we've had 5% inflation, in large part due to this oil shock. And so then, where is the economy heading? Holding all of the things constant, where is the economy going to go? To the left? What do you mean left? Let me go, Justin. What were you saying?
I was saying it's gonna go like down. It's gonna be.
We're currently here. Here's the long run potential. This one's kind of a tricky one. Where are we going to go in the long run? So this is the new short run equilibrium. So the short run effect, we have high prices and low inflation. While you guys think, let's kind of write down the short run effect. So the short run effect is short run aggregate supply and aggregate demand intersecting, where there's an increase in the price level and a decrease in output. So there's a term for this one that kind of got coined during there. It's called stagflation. Prices are up, the economy's down, and in fact, we kind of experienced this during the COVID time. This is not a good situation to be in. Think about our biggies. What do we want this doing in general over the long run? Going up. What do we want this one doing? Low and stable anyway, right? So low and stable. So now we've got this shock of prices going up, unstable inflation, and so stagflation is the combination of stagnation, which is a decrease in output, and then of course inflation is the increase in the price level. So we call this stagflation, where it's a combination of both. Not a good situation for the economy to be in. All right, so now back to my question. Where would we head in the long run, holding all of the things equal? The intersection of what? Look back at your notes. You should have it in there. We just wrote it a couple paragraphs ago, or within the last 20 minutes here, 20 or 30 minutes. Where is the economy heading in the long run? The intersection of what two curves? You gotta have this memorized. Yep. So the aggregate, which one? Long run aggregate supply?
No, sorry, it's short.
Short run?
and long run.
What'd you guys find in your notes? All right, extra credit question. Everybody pull out a piece of paper. You're going to get points for this today. Where is the economy heading towards in the long run? How do we know where the economy is going with the invisible hand? The intersection of what two curves? On your paper, but the intersection of what two curves is where the economy is going. You can talk to your neighbor, you can copy your neighbor's paper, but you got 10 seconds. 10. It's in your notes. 9, 8,
You
7,
said something about 80.
6, 5, 4,
I think.
3,
That was-
2, 1. All right, I need all the papers in the next 10 seconds. 10, 9, 8, hurry, 7, 6, 5, pass them to the middle, 4, 3, 2, 1, 1/2, 1/3, 1/4, 1/8, last call, done. All right. So, where are we heading in the long run? The intersection of what? Long run. Aggregate supply and aggregate demand. Supply equals demand. Just think of supply equals demand, but we'll use the long run curve. In the long run, we're heading there. So what needs to happen is that resource prices need to kind of adjust to this new price shock. So we'd actually be heading back to this point C. So the short run effect, we have some stagflation. In the long run effect, we'd head back, we go toward intersection of long run aggregate supply and aggregate demand. So in this case, we're kind of going back from A to B, back to A, would be the correction that needs to be done. And so prices are going to deflate. By the way, output prices as well. So prices are going to adjust. So a decrease in the price level and an increase in output back to the full employment level of output. That would be the invisible hand effect. Now, how long is that going to take? Well, it might take a while. We might be in recession for a while. So that's the question on how long that will take is debatable. Tim?
How's that going to happen? Because that's why things were going to happen, but I couldn't explain to myself why.
So we'd start to adjust, yeah. You know, we could substitute away from oil in the long run, right? So one thing is we're gonna change our behavior so that we're not using as much oil, right? So you start making adjustments to it, and that would start to bring things down. So immediately we couldn't, you know, we were just using oil, that was our normal production process, but now we start seeking alternatives over the long run, and those prices, so even if this remained high, it wouldn't have the same stinging effect that it had in the short run. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So that would be the adjustment process. All right, we'll pick up there tomorrow.